It's November 1952, and just past midnight, floodlights rake across the line of the biggest bombers ever built. The B-36 Peacemaker's wings are wider than a city block, thick enough to crawl through catwalks to service the 3 giant props hanging from each side. But even that is not enough for this mission, and 2 additional jet pods crown the wingtips. Below, a ground team guides a classified shape into the bay, a heavy, muted object that strains the cradle under it. Only the Peacemaker can haul the weapon. What it can't do is outrun it. Fully loaded, it climbs like a freight ship and turns even slower. The crew has plotted an escape maneuver timed to the second. Nose over, full power, jets burning. This should keep them ahead of the fireball. But no one has ever tried it with a live thermonuclear weapon. By 1941, Nazi forces dominated most of Europe, and Britain fought on alone, holding the line while the continent lay in occupation. In Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold and his staff in the Air War Plans Division looked across the Atlantic with growing alarm. If Britain were lost, the United States would stand alone against Germany, separated by an ocean nearly 3,000 miles wide. The bombers then in service, the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, were powerful machines that lacked the range to reach deep into Europe. Aerial refueling was still experimental, and America had no bases close enough to strike the Axis heartland. The only answer was an aircraft unlike anything yet built, a bomber that could cross the Atlantic, hit Germany, and return home without refueling. This idea wasn't born overnight. 2 years earlier, in 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had declared American air power, quote, utterly inadequate, and asked Congress for $300 million to build 3,000 new aircraft. When the Luftwaffe's dominance became undeniable, he raised the goal to 50,000 planes, prompting the creation of the Defense Plant Corporation to fund massive new inland factories, safe from coastal attack. Those planes became the backbone of America's wartime aviation industry. As Britain stood under siege, General Henry Hap Arnold and his planners revived the concept of a very long-range bomber. The Army Air Corps, soon to become the Army Air Forces, issued specifications that bordered on the impossible. A 10,000-mile round trip, a top speed of 450 miles per hour, a cruising speed of 275, and a service ceiling of 45,000 feet, high above flak and interceptors. The bomber had to carry 10,000 pounds of bombs to any point in Europe and return in a single flight. After an initial lack of industry interest, the Air Force revised its requirements. The new requirements, cruising speed between 240 and 300 miles per hour, ceiling of 40,000 feet, and a 4,000-mile combat radius, were enough for a bomber leaving Boston to reach Berlin and come home. These more practical figures finally caught manufacturers' attention. Several companies submitted proposals, but only 2 really matched the Air Force's vision for an intercontinental bomber. Northrop's bold flying wing concept and Consolidated's Model 36, a huge 6-engine design that favored range and dependability over cutting-edge experimentation. Boeing also submitted sleek, forward-looking concepts that seemed decades ahead of their time. They promised greater speed and efficiency at high altitude, but relied on advanced materials, complex pressurization systems, and engine performance that simply didn't yet exist. At that stage, the United States lacked the industrial capacity and technical experience to mass-produce such futuristic aircraft. With resources already stretched thin by the war effort, Boeing's proposal was deemed impractical for immediate production. The Air Force needed a bomber that could be built, tested, and deployed quickly. Consolidated aircraft, already successful with the rugged B-24 Liberator, offered the most realized path forward, an aircraft built on familiar engineering principles, but scaled to unprecedented proportions. Their Model 36 measured more than 160 feet long, with a wingspan of 230 feet and internal passages that allowed crew members to crawl through the wings in flight. The Army Air Forces selected Consolidated's design and ordered 2 prototypes under the designation XB-36. Then, in December 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor pulled the United States into total war. Virtually overnight, every resource, aluminum, labor, engines, was redirected to proven bombers like the B-17, B-24, and later the B-29. The intercontinental bomber was shelved, its production space overtaken by the urgent needs of wartime manufacturing. Still, inside Consolidated's San Diego plant, a small team of engineers kept the long-range bomber project alive. Working with limited resources, they refined blueprints and updated calculations between other assignments, convinced that once the war's immediate demands eased, America would again need an aircraft capable of striking any target on the planet from its own soil. To build the world's largest bomber, America needed more than engineers. It needed a city. That city was Fort Worth, Texas, and its driving force was Amon G. Carter, publisher of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Carter was known for his energy and political reach, a civic leader who could rally presidents, pressure senators, and outmaneuver his rival city, Dallas. When the government began looking for safe inland sites to expand aircraft production, he saw an opportunity to turn Fort Worth from a cattle town into an aviation hub. After President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the Defense Plant Corporation in 1940, channeling hundreds of millions of dollars into new aircraft factories located far from coastal attack, Carter went to work immediately, calling in every favor he had in Washington and within Roosevelt's circle. When surveyors leaned toward Dallas, he countered with water studies, land reports, and political pressure until the decision shifted west. His persistence paid off. Fort Worth was awarded Government Aircraft Plant 4, a vast complex beside Lake Worth with runways long enough for future heavy bombers. Construction moved at wartime speed. Within 9 months, steel frames rose from the prairie, and by January 1942, Consolidated Aircraft accepted the plant. At its peak, more than 25,000 workers, many former farmers and housewives, were assembling bombers around the clock. With car production halted and fuel rationed, buses and converted trailers brought workers from across North Texas. The sound of rivet guns filled the plains as Fort Worth transformed into a city built around aviation. Between 1942 and 45, the plant produced over 3,000 B-24 Liberators and B-32 Dominators. By mid-1944, the tide of war had turned decisively in the Pacific. The Marianas Campaign was nearly complete, and B-29 superfortresses were preparing to strike the Japanese homeland. As victory began to look inevitable, the Army Air Forces concluded that a very long-range bomber was no longer an immediate necessity. Even so, confidence in the idea never disappeared. That August, the Army signed a $160 million contract for 100 B-36s, signaling that while one war was ending, the next would be defined by global reach. When the fighting stopped in 1945, the plant shifted from wartime production to peacetime innovation. During those final months, Consolidated merged with Volte to form Convair, and Fort Worth, Amon Carter City, became the company's industrial hub for America's next generation of bombers. By the time work on the XB-36 prototype resumed, aviation had changed. Jet propulsion was arriving, radar had transformed navigation, and pressurized cabins were essential for high-altitude flight. Each advance forced Convair's engineers to revise the design again and again. The result was more than a bomber. It was a leap in strategic aviation. When the XB-36 finally rolled out on September 8, 1945, 1 month after Japan's surrender, it stunned even its builders. At 230 feet across and 162 feet long, it was the biggest military aircraft ever built at the time. The landing gear alone carried 9-foot tires, and its 4,772 square-foot wings could support a suburban house. At nearly 5 stories tall, it dominated the Fort Worth skyline. Powered by 6 Pratt & Whitney R-4360 Wasp Major radial engines mounted in pusher configuration, it drove massive propellers behind the wings instead of in front. The layout reduced drag and improved visibility, but demanded complex cooling and maintenance tunnels through the wings. That early feature, the vast wings, large enough for a man to crawl through, carried over into the prototype, a feature no bomber had ever offered before. At the time, Convair engineers expected that final outfitting and taxi tests would take about 6 months before the first flight. That timeline proved optimistic. As systems were installed and ground tests began, one deadline after another rushed by. By May 1943, Secretary of War Robert P. Patterson told a House subcommittee that the aircraft was, quote, due to fly next month, a prediction repeated throughout the summer as crews wrestled with modifications and flight readiness issues. However, the B-36's enormous size created new challenges in hydraulic pressure, control response, and cooling. Finally, on August 8, 1946, the giant took to the air. Test pilots Beryl A. Erickson and G.H. Collins eased the XB-36 down the long runway at Carswell Field. The aircraft lifted smoothly and remained aloft for 37 minutes, reaching 8,000 feet before landing without incident. Its first flight was remarkably uneventful, translating into a victory for both Convair and the armed forces. Subsequent test flights confirmed a top speed of around 320 miles per hour, which was impressive for a piston-powered giant, but slower than planners had once hoped. On March 22, 1948, Convair officials announced that the 7th Bombardment Wing at Carswell Air Force Base, located just across the runway from the Fort Worth plant, would become the first operational unit to receive the B-36. The first of 100 aircraft, they claimed, would be delivered, quote, sometime this week. As before, optimism outpaced reality, as ongoing modifications delayed the delivery by more than 3 months. The first production aircraft, City of Fort Worth, marked the true beginning of Strategic Air Command's nuclear era. Rolled out of Convair's Plant 4 and delivered on June 26, 1948, it became the first B-36A, assigned to the 7th Bomb Wing. The aircraft became essential for early training. In it, crews learned how to handle the world's largest bomber, using it for mechanical tests, qualification flights, and public demonstrations that showed just how far America could now reach. That summer, another B-36A from the 7th Bomb Wing completed a 33-hour endurance flight from Fort Worth to San Diego and back, proving that the Peacemaker could cross oceans without refueling. On December 7, 1948, precisely 7 years after Pearl Harbor, a B-36B staged a simulated atomic strike on Hawaii. The 8,100-mile mission carried a 10,000-pound dummy bomb load, dropped near the islands before returning home after 35 hours in the air. Averaging 236 miles per hour, the flight demonstrated that the United States could strike almost any target on Earth in return. The B-36's approach to Hawaii went entirely unnoticed. Radar and air defenses failed to detect the aircraft, a situation that drew sharp criticism from local military officials given the date. Still, for the first time, Strategic Air Command possessed an aircraft that could reach any target on the planet from American soil. That kind of reach came at a cost. The B-36 demanded constant care, with its early models plagued by mechanical problems. They climbed slowly, leaked hydraulic fluid, and suffered from overheating engines that often caught fire. At any given time, SAC had fewer than 50 B-36s, with only a fraction ready to fly. Ground crews worked through blazing summers and freezing nights, crawling through the wings to reach engines for mid-mission repairs. And yet, no other aircraft on Earth could carry America's atomic weapons across an ocean. For General Curtis LeMay's young SAC, the B-36 was both shield and burden, immense in reach, fragile in reliability. More importantly, it gave the United States nuclear muscle before tankers, missiles, or stealth bombers existed, defining the opening years of the Cold War in the sky. To keep the B-36 program alive, the newly independent U.S. Air Force had to persuade Congress, the public, and the Pentagon that the bomber was worth its enormous price tag. By the late 1940s, Convair was running an aggressive publicity campaign, including newspaper ads, polished brochures, and guided factory tours, all of which promoted the aircraft as the new face of American power. Reporters marveled at the Fort Worth plant, where congressmen posed under the bomber's 5-story tail. Convair engineers even started describing it as the aircraft designed to keep the next war from ever starting. The claims grew bolder each year. Press releases boasted that the B-36 could carry parasite jet fighters like the XF-85 Goblin, and even circled the globe without refueling. The truth was more modest, but in the early Cold War, perception mattered as much as performance. In 1948, the Air Force staged formation flights over major cities, sending B-36s rumbling across the sky to remind Americans and the world of U.S. reach. A year later, Convair sought a name worthy of that image. In April 1949, a company contest produced Peacemaker. Judges said it reflected the bomber's purpose of securing peace through strength. Religious groups protested that, quote, there was only one true peacemaker, and the Air Force never made it official. The press, on the other hand, embraced it, and the name stuck. Hollywood helped spread the B-36's image even further. In 1955, Strategic Air Command, starring Jimmy Stewart, turned the B-36 into a Cold War icon, showcasing its 12 engines thundering across the screen as America's airborne guardian. Behind the glamour, though, a bureaucratic war raged. The newly independent Air Force and its Strategic Air Command battled the Navy for control of the atomic mission. The Navy's proposed supercarrier, the USS United States, was designed to launch nuclear-capable jet bombers at sea. Only weeks after the naming contest, the carrier project was canceled. The decision handed the nuclear role and the future deterrence to the Air Force. The B-36 had won the first great power struggle of the Cold War. Even so, as a bomber, it stood with one foot in the piston age and the other in the jet era. Its power plant reflected that uneasy transition, anchored by the most significant radial engines ever mass-produced. Flight testing soon revealed that those engines alone couldn't provide enough thrust for takeoff or high-speed flight when the aircraft was fully loaded. In 1949, Convair solved the problem by adding 4 General Electric J-47 turbojets in pods under the outer wings, 2 on each side. The new hybrid power plant gave the bomber its unforgettable identity: 6 turning and 4 burning. With all 10 engines roaring, the B-36 could reach 435 miles per hour, climb above 45,000 feet, and fly 10,000 miles without refueling. It could even haul an 86,000-pound payload, including the colossal Mark 17 hydrogen bomb, the largest ever carried by an aircraft. That performance came at a steep cost. Each piston engine held 56 spark plugs, 336 per plane, and they fouled constantly. Ignition systems misfired, cylinders overheated, and engine fires were frequent. Meanwhile, the jet engines burned fuel so quickly that crews used them sparingly, saving them for takeoff, climb, or emergencies where speed meant survival. Maintenance was endless. Crews joked that 6 turning and 4 burning really meant 2 turning, 2 burning, 2 smoking, 2 choking, and 2 more unaccounted for. Each flight required more than 600 pre-flight checks, and spark plugs needed constant replacement. For every bomber ready to fly, another sat in overhaul at Carswell, Fairchild, or Fort Worth's Plant 4, its wings open like a dissected whale, while mechanics swapped engines and panels. To keep the fleet operational, the Air Force launched Project Samsack in 1953, upgrading radar and oxygen and cooling systems. Then, on September 1, 1952, a tornado ripped through Carswell AFB, wrecking or damaging 2/3 of the Peacemakers parked there. Days later, recovery crews from SAC, Convair, and local contractors swarmed the base. Within weeks, many of the bombers were flying again after a massive repair effort that showed just how vital the B-36 had become to America's nuclear strategy. Between 1949 and 1953, SAC lived on constant alert. At Carswell, Fairchild, and Walker Air Force bases, bombers sat armed and fueled on the tarmac, crews sleeping in bunks a few steps from their aircraft. One scramble alarm could send entire squadrons roaring down the runway, climbing in formation toward the Arctic routes that would become the backbone of American nuclear strategy. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, LeMay faced pressure to deploy the B-36 into combat, but he refused. The bomber's long range and nuclear capacity made it too valuable and too revealing to risk over a conventional battlefield. Rather than fight directly, the bomber served in the background of the war, patrolling the poles, flying endurance missions across the Pacific, and rehearsing nuclear strike profiles that could reach deep into Soviet territory if the Cold War ever turned hot. Those missions prepared the crews for what was to come. By the early 1950s, the Peacemaker had evolved into the delivery system for the most destructive weapon ever created. In November 1952, the B-36H from the 7th Bomb Wing carried out the world's first airdrop of the live thermonuclear device, Operation Ivy's Shot King. The detonation yielded about 500 kilotons, more than 10 times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. Though it was a boosted fission device rather than the full 2-stage H-bomb, the test proved the B-36 could deliver the biggest weapons then in the U.S. stockpile. It also showed why delivery was becoming a race against physics. King was dropped from high altitude, and the crew executed a timed escape from the moment the bomb left the bay. Even so, the shockwave rolled outward so fast that planners could calculate, using the drop altitude, the bomb's true airspeed, and the measured blast radius, that future megaton-class weapons would overtake any prop-driven bomber before it could clear the danger zone. The B-36 had the range to get there, but not the speed to get away. The immediate fix was mainly about technique. Crews dropped from higher altitude, followed preset escape routes, and went to full power the moment the bomb was away. The bigger fix came from new technology and a new strategy. SAC moved to faster jet bombers, first the B-47, then the B-52, and adopted bomb designs and delivery methods that gave crews a few more seconds to get clear, like parachute retardant or laydown drops. At the same time, the US pushed hard toward intercontinental missiles, which could deliver a warhead without having to fly out of the blast zone afterward. For the next few years, SAC still counted on the B-36 to carry the biggest weapons in the stockpile, including early thermonuclear bombs, while crews relied on those tightened escape procedures to survive the drop. And still, even if it could deliver the new bombs, it just couldn't keep pace with what they were becoming. As the Cold War deepened, a new breed of B-36 took on one of the most dangerous jobs in aviation. The RB-36 reconnaissance variants, easily identified by camera bays, sensor pods, and enlarged observation windows that replaced bomb racks with lenses, film, and fuel. Inside their cavernous fuselages, engineers installed Fairchild and Hicon cameras, onboard darkrooms, and additional fuel tanks for flights lasting up to 40 hours. Crews joked the RB-36 could spot a golf ball from 45,000 feet. At such ranges, they flew above the reach of most Soviet interceptors of the early 1950s. Most missions launched from bases in Alaska, Greenland, or the United Kingdom, threading dangerous routes over the Arctic Circle, Scandinavia, and the North Pacific. Crews battled magnetic interference, freezing temperatures that clogged fuel lines, and storms that shook the massive aircraft like a leaf. These flights mapped radar networks, submarine pens, missile ranges, and any infrastructure hinting at Soviet nuclear development. Though officially labeled as mapping or weather reconnaissance, many flights pushed to the edge of Soviet airspace and occasionally crossed it. Every mission carried the risk of an international incident, but the intelligence gathered proved invaluable. The images revealed the growth of Soviet long-range air power, expanding radar coverage, and emerging missile sites. These flights became the first true strategic reconnaissance operations of the Cold War, laying the groundwork for the U-2, SR-71, and the satellite systems that followed. In 1955, Convair pushed the airframe into even stranger territory. A modified B-36, designated MB-36H, took to the air with a working nuclear reactor on board to test shielding for a potential atomic-powered aircraft. The plane's engines still burned conventional fuel, but the reactor powered the cabin and systems so engineers could study how a nuclear-powered bomber might operate. The program continued until 1961, when John F. Kennedy canceled it after nearly $1 billion in research. When the B-36 entered service, it was hailed as untouchable. SAC leaders touted it as invulnerable, a flying fortress of the upper air. For a moment, it seemed true. Then came the MiG-15. The Soviet jet, drawing on captured German research and British-supplied engines, changed the balance overnight. By the early 1950s, MiG-15s were climbing past 50,000 feet, their heavy cannons reaching even higher. In Korea, American crews watched MiGs tear through B-29 formations, proving that altitude no longer guaranteed safety. At extreme heights, the rule shifted. The thin air starved Soviet jets of maneuverability, while the B-36's vast wings gave it surprising stability. Crews even claimed the Peacemaker could outturn a MiG at 45,000 feet. Defensive turrets and high-altitude banking offered some protection, but each new Soviet jet and missile narrowed the odds. The Soviet Union responded as if the B-36 were already crossing its borders, reshaping radar networks, interceptor units, and air defense batteries specifically to counter it. Its presence loomed so large in Soviet planning that they created the first full ground-controlled interception network, linking radar and radio sites from the Arctic to the Black Sea, and giving controllers the ability to guide fighters at ranges of hundreds of miles. The B-36's immense radar signature only made the threat more urgent. At over 160 feet long, it appeared as a beacon on early warning screens. Soviet designers launched a crash effort to close the gap, developing faster interceptors like the MiG-17 and Yak-25, and experimenting with the first surface-to-air missiles. Furthermore, every advance in Soviet air defense revolved around preventing the Peacemaker from reaching Soviet skies. By the mid-1950s, U.S. planners feared that the bomber, which had once symbolized post-war dominance, was already becoming obsolete. To maintain credibility, Strategic Air Command needed to show its hand by demonstrating that its bombers weren't just watching the world, but capable of reaching it. By the fall of 1953, the Korean armistice had been signed only weeks earlier, ending open conflict, but not the rivalry. Meanwhile, hydrogen bomb tests by both the United States and the Soviet Union had transformed the balance of power, ushering in an era of nuclear brinkmanship. To demonstrate that America's nuclear reach was unmatched, SAC launched Operation Big Stick, a long-range deployment across the Pacific designed to prove that U.S. bombers could strike any target without relying on foreign bases or aerial refueling. The mission fell to the 92nd Bomb Wing, based at Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington. Beginning in September 1953, the wing sent its B-36 Peacemakers on a month-long journey across the vast Pacific, staging through Japan, Okinawa, and Guam. For these forward locations, crews flew endurance runs, simulated bombing missions, and precision navigation exercises that tested both aircraft and airmen to their limits. Over the open ocean, the flights were navigated only by radio bearings and celestial fixes, tracing invisible arcs toward their targets. In their bomb bays, they carried photo flash bombs for practice runs, featuring detonations so bright they could be recorded on film from miles away. Operation Big Stick finally showed that the Peacemaker's legendary 10,000-mile range wasn't just a number created for propaganda purposes. When the bombers arrived at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, the press across the Pacific took notice. Local newspapers marveled at the sight, describing the arriving formation as an American air armada. Even as the Peacemaker proved its reach, the world around it was changing faster than its engines could turn. By 1954, Boeing's new B-47 Stratojet was everything the B-36 was not: sleek, swept-wing, and blisteringly fast. It tore across the sky at more than 600 miles per hour, nearly twice the Peacemaker's best speed, with climb performance and agility no piston-powered bomber could match. And yet, the Stratojet came with a catch. To cross oceans, it depended on a growing web of aerial tankers and overseas bases. The Air Force wanted something with jet speed and global range. The answer was the B-52 Stratofortress, a bomber that matched the B-36's payload while carrying it across continents at jet velocity. Furthermore, Soviet interceptors now climbed higher and faster each year, while the USSR fielded early surface-to-air missiles designed to destroy high-altitude bombers long before they reached their targets. Meanwhile, the American strategy was shifting. Under President Eisenhower's doctrine of massive retaliation, nuclear deterrence moved away from visible bomber fleets toward intercontinental and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. These forces could strike from hiding in minutes. Visibility, once a symbol of strength, had become a liability. Ironically, the B-36 had helped create this reality. Its long polar flights had pushed the Soviets to build the same system that would soon make slow bombers vulnerable. The Peacemaker's dominance paved the way for its own obsolescence. Through the late 1950s, Strategic Air Command kept the B-36 on patrol and on nuclear alert, but retirements began in 1956. The end came in 1959. On February 12th, the last operational B-36J lifted off from Biggs Air Force Base, circled Fort Worth one final time, and landed at Amon Carter Field under the fitting name Operation Sayonara. Of the 384 Peacemakers built, only 4 survived today. The rest were scrapped, their aluminum melted down to make the bombers that replaced them. In its lifetime, the Peacemaker never dropped a bomb in combat. It didn't have to. For a decade, its mere existence made war too costly to start.